Have you ever had someone judge you for something you love just because they didn't understand it? Well, that's exactly what happened to me with one of the most obnoxious people I've ever met, the HOA Karen. It all started when I was just out in my yard, trying to enjoy some quiet time in my military gear, doing a little training. But apparently, that wasn't okay with her. She marched up, scoffed, and called me a one-abe soldier, like my service wasn't real, like my dedication didn't mean anything. At first, I just stood there shocked. I mean, who does that? But instead of getting angry, I decided to take a different approach. I knew this wasn't something I could just brush off. So I made a call to my Marine squad. What happened next was something I never could have predicted. They showed up in full gear, ready to make a statement. And when the HOA Karen saw us standing there, ready to defend not just ourselves, but everything we stood for, her face went completely pale. But that's not where the story ends. Things only escalated from here, and what happened next? Well, you won't believe it. Stay tuned for what happened when she realized she messed with the wrong person. It wasn't just about her calling me a one-abe soldier anymore. It was about respect. I've dedicated years of my life to serving my country, and I wasn't about to let some entitled neighbor walk all over that. What really bothered me, though, was the assumption she made that somehow, because I wasn't in uniform every day, I didn't deserve to be proud of my service. But what she didn't know was that my squad and I still trained regularly. We still held ourselves to the same standards, even if we weren't always in the spotlight. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just a personal attack. It was a broader issue, one that a lot of veterans, especially those who serve outside of combat zones, face. We're often overlooked, dismissed as if our contributions don't count. So I wasn't just going to stand there and take it. I decided to call in the big guns. My Marine squad didn't hesitate. It didn't matter that it was late in the day or that we had other things to do. They showed up in full gear, ready to make sure that no one ever disrespected us like that again. But when we all stood on my lawn, the look on her face was something I won't forget. It was a mix of shock, fear, and maybe a bit of regret. But what came next? Well, let's just say she wasn't done making things difficult. As we stood there, a small crowd began to gather on the street, drawn by the commotion. Some of the neighbors, who had seen the confrontation earlier, looked curious, while others seemed uncomfortable. I could feel the weight of their eyes on us, but I wasn't about to back down. My squad and I stood firm, our military gear shining under the fading sun, our presence speaking louder than any words could. The HOA Karen, now standing at the edge of my driveway, crossed her arms and tried to hold her ground. But it was clear she wasn't expecting this. She opened her mouth to say something, but it came out wrong. "This is just a stunt, right? You don't have to do this," she stammered. She wasn't mad anymore. Now she was trying to backpedal, soften her stance, but it was too late for that. The damage had already been done. What she didn't realize was that this wasn't just about her. This was a reflection of something bigger. Every veteran I knew had a story like mine, moments where we were overlooked or misunderstood. Every time someone like her dismissed our service, it chipped away a little bit of the pride we'd worked so hard to build. My squad understood that. They weren't just there for me. They were there for all of us, standing together to remind the world that we were more than just what they saw on the surface. And yet, even with all that, it wasn't over. Karen didn't give up. In fact, she seemed to double down. "You can't just do this," she snapped, her voice rising. "You're not even following the HOA rules." I looked at my squad, the tension in the air thickening. This wasn't just about her insulting us anymore. Now it was about authority, power, and control. And the worst part, she had no idea just how far she was about to push us. Her words cut through the tension like a knife, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Karen wasn't backing down, she was escalating. She was so focused on the HOA rules, trying to deflect and throw out technicalities, that she couldn't see the bigger picture. This wasn't about a property line or a lawn ornament. It was about respect, and as much as she tried to paint me as the problem, I knew that she was the one crossing a line, the line between a neighborly disagreement and something that couldn't be undone. One of my squad mates, a tall guy with a deep voice, stepped forward, his stance as steady as a rock. "You're making this worse for yourself," he said, his words calm but carrying a weight that made Karen flinch. He wasn't trying to provoke her. He was just speaking the truth. But that's when she did something I didn't expect. She pulled out her phone and started recording. "Let's see if the HOA will take your little military cosplay seriously," she said with a sneer. The way she said it, like she was trying to turn the situation into some kind of joke, made my blood boil. But I kept my cool. This wasn't the time for reacting. This was the time for action. As I glanced at my squad, I could feel the collective tension. We all knew what we were about to do. But we also knew there were consequences. If we made the wrong move, it could get ugly. Karen was smart enough to know she was walking a fine line too, because there was one thing we had in common: neither of us was about to back down. The crowd around us had grown larger now, and I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for the next move. A neighbor across the street whispered something to another, but I couldn't make it out. My mind was racing. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't going to end quietly. The question was, who was going to make the first real move? Just as the tension reached a breaking point, something unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, a black SUV rolled up to the curb. I glanced at it, my instincts kicking in. The vehicle wasn't familiar, but what struck me was the way the driver parked, precisely, without hesitation, right in front of Karen's house. The engine cut off and the door opened. I wasn't the only one who noticed. My squad stiffened, and even Karen stopped her recording for a second, her eyes flicking to the new arrival. From the vehicle stepped a man in a suit, not just any suit, but one that screamed authority. The kind of suit that you didn't mess with. He walked towards Karen, and I could see her face light up in recognition. "Oh, thank God, you're here," she said, practically running over to him. I couldn't hear the rest of what she said, but I could guess. She was calling in reinforcements. What happened next took everyone by surprise. The man in the suit turned towards me and my squad, his gaze cold. "You need to leave," he said, his voice sharp and no nonsense. "Now." I stood still, trying to process what was happening. I had a feeling this wasn't just some random person. Karen had brought in someone with influence, maybe a lawyer, or even someone with ties to the HOA, someone with real power. And suddenly, this wasn't just about her and me anymore. This was about something bigger, something much more dangerous. But before I could respond, the man in the suit pulled out a piece of paper, flashing it in front of me. "You're trespassing," he said with a grin that didn't sit right. "And if you don't leave, there will be legal consequences." The crowd around us shifted uncomfortably. Some of the neighbors looked uneasy, glancing from me to the man in the suit, and then back at the house. Karen was watching with a smug look on her face. There was something in her eyes, something that made me think she wasn't entirely in control of the situation either. I could feel my squad's energy shift. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. This was war. But what was their endgame? And how far would they go to make me and my team back down? My mind raced as I stood there, staring down the man who had just turned a simple confrontation into something much darker. The air felt thick, heavy with tension. I looked at the man in the suit, trying to read his next move. My squad was ready to react, but something told me this wasn't going to be as simple as a confrontation over property rights. This was bigger. The piece of paper he'd waved in front of me. I didn't trust it. My gut told me it was a bluff, just another attempt to make us back off. But what was the game here? Why bring in someone so official-looking if they weren't serious? I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. I wasn't going to let Karen or her lawyer, or whatever he was, scare us off. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You can throw as many papers as you want at me, but we're not backing down. You might have some legal power, but you're messing with the wrong people." The man didn't budge, but then Karen, still standing beside him, did something that stopped everyone dead in their tracks. She pulled out a small envelope from her bag and handed it to him. "Here," she said quietly. "I think this will settle things." I watched as the man in the suit opened the envelope, his eyes scanning whatever was inside. For a moment, he looked surprised. Not just surprised, but shocked, like whatever he'd read had completely changed his perspective. He looked up at Karen, then at me, then back at the squad. A flicker of hesitation passed through his normally cold expression. "This is not what I thought," he muttered under his breath, his voice softer than before. He turned toward Karen, his demeanor shifting. "You should have told me about this." I could see Karen's smug smile start to fade, her confidence wavering. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tight with sudden uncertainty. The man in the suit sighed, folding the paper back into the envelope and tucking it away. "This isn't what you said it was," he admitted. "In fact, it's a mistake, a misunderstanding." My squad exchanged looks, the confusion mirrored in my own. Karen looked like she'd just been punched in the gut. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice rising. The man didn't answer her. Instead, he turned back to me. "Look," he said, his tone shifting again, this time with an almost apologetic edge. "I'm not saying everything here is okay, but that paper was an internal HOA error. You're not trespassing. There's no case here. I'm sorry for the confusion." I stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. The world around me felt like it had been flipped on its head. Karen's anger, her sense of victory, everything she thought she had under control, was slipping away faster than she could hold onto it. But before anyone could react, I noticed something strange. There was a shadow in the crowd, a figure who had been standing at the edge of the group, watching us the whole time. I hadn't noticed them before, but now I couldn't take my eyes off them. And then, just as quickly as they'd appeared, they turned and disappeared into the night. What was that about? Was someone else watching? And if so, why? The man in the suit cleared his throat, now visibly uncomfortable, and started to back away. "This is over," he said, his voice suddenly unsure. "We're done here." Karen, still processing the shocking revelation, opened her mouth to protest, but the man stopped her with a sharp glance. "Let it go," he said quietly. And with that, he turned and walked back to the SUV, leaving Karen standing there, her mouth agape. As the tension slowly began to ease, I realized one thing: this was far from over. We may have won this battle, but there was something bigger at play, something that neither Karen nor the man in the suit had prepared me for. And now I had to find out exactly what was behind it all, and who that mysterious figure was, watching from the shadows, because something told me this was just the beginning. As the man in the suit disappeared into the SUV, Karen stood there, still stunned, her plans unraveling right before her eyes. The neighbors, who had been watching this entire showdown, slowly began to disperse, some murmuring among themselves, others still processing what had just happened. It felt surreal, but at least it was over for now. I turned to my squad, who had been silent throughout the whole ordeal. No one said a word, but we didn't need to. We had stood our ground together. And in the end, that was what mattered. Karen might have thought she could use her influence to intimidate us, but it was clear she had underestimated the strength of unity. As I watched her retreat into her house, I felt a sense of relief mixed with something else, curiosity. Who was that mysterious figure? And why had the man in the suit been so shaken by the papers? The answers were still out there, but for now, I had proven my point. Sometimes, it's not about fighting for victory. It's about standing up for what's right. In the end, I knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, I wasn't going to let anyone disrespect my service again. And as for Karen, she had just learned a hard lesson in messing with the wrong people.